Hello and welcome to another episode of Unlocked. Lee Skot has an awesome last name. Yes, it is my first name, but it's also awesome because it's one syllable, just like his first name. And if you have two one syllable first name, that's pretty cool. So I think that's awesome. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is unleashing leaders. I talk about unlocking leaders, but we're going to use the word unleash because that's kind of what Lee's all about. Lee has been in this leadership development space for like 25 years. He's made a huge impact in Sacramento and in Boise. That's where they're based, and all over the place. He's trained over 25,000 different types of individuals in different organizations, and that's pretty awesome. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is how do we unleash ourselves? How do we unleash those that we're leading to become better? Well, we do that through cliffhanger. Yep, cliffhanger. There's one thing that Lee really hones in on. Now, we talk about a bunch of cool things in this interview, but at the end, we talk about what is the one thing that you would really take away from this? That's the gold. Okay, so here we come, Lee. Here we are, Lee, again. It's good to meet you. Good to talk to you. Best last name ever. Congratulations.
You and I share so much in common. It's not ironic that we have similar names, but we have a unique twist on it, just like we do with our leadership philosophies. I love it.
There it is. There it is. So very cool. So Chief Change Agent. I love this title. Why did you pick that one?
I think the reason is, first of all, I couldn't be the CEO anymore because I hired one, and he was great for that role. It was leveraging his strengths. It was perfect for how we were trying to grow. And it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm not ready to retire yet. So Chief Change Agent is really that philosophy that we are trying to build the capacity of other catalysts for change. How do we get our change agents, our trusted advisors and consultants to be at the top of their game so they can help our customers be at the top of their game. And that's really my passion and where my strengths lie. So I decided, hey, that'd be the best way I could contribute to this company going forward.
Cool. I dig it. I liked it. You don't hear it all the time. So it's interesting to hear what the idea is behind that. So with unleashing leaders, give us the 30-second. What are you doing right now to create change in a world where things are changing all the time, right? But some for the good, some for the bad. But what is the niche you're filling? What are you trying to do that is like, that is really driving us to be a healthier culture, healthy, whatever?
Yeah, you bet. Healthier country, healthier societies and communities. But everything we do at Unleashing Leaders is around a shared purpose to accelerate the changes willing leaders seek. Right. So we've got people out there in their communities, trying to make things, better for their customers or their employees or their organizations. And, we kind of believe that leadership's a little bit like gravity, Scott. It wants to happen. And the way that happens is by focusing on four key outcomes. The first one is we believe that, leadership requires a strong, cohesive team. The idea that one great knight can ride in and save us all, just doesn't make any sense. And so whether you're on the front lines, the middle, or at the top, like you've got to have a couple of compatriots to leverage their skills. And then with that, they can really drive clarity towards where are we going and why. What's that vision? What are those strategies? What are those priorities? And that's something that a lot of leaders are busy, but they're not necessarily productive. So how do we, focus that clarity so we know where we're going? And then that allows them to better align their processes and resources. And then we can bring in the lean and Six Sigma and theory of constraints in a very, very lightweight fashion for most organizations. We don't need the heavy stuff. But that allows them to get more of their things moving where they want them to go. It's kind of like many times in my life, I've had a vision that I would be a smaller version of me. But then at midnight, I'm having a chocolate chip cookie, right? So I'm not really in alignment with my stuff. Many organizations are like that. Everybody says, yeah, that's where we're going to go, but we're doing something perpendicular. And then I think the real unique piece of it is that we do it in this integrated way by also embedding the change management throughout that process. So that's what really engages the hearts, the heads, and the hands of those teams so they can contribute purposefully to it. And like I said, it's kind of like gravity. This stuff wants to happen, Scott. Evolution's happening. Change wants to happen. Work wants to get done. Customers want to get served, and people want to serve their customers. But there's these things that get in the way, and it's our job to help remove those so that it can flow versus trying to force it so it goes. That I would say that's our big differentiator in how we approach leadership.
Very, very cool. So hit those 4 points for me real quick
Sure.
again.
So strong, cohesive leadership teams,
Yep.
team sport, clarity of our vision and values for where we're going and why, alignment of our processes and our resources, so we're investing them in the right ways, and then engaging the talents of our teams to make that all happen. And then that has a positive, virtuous effect because as the team's more engaged, they see the next opportunities for innovation and impact, and it creates this virtuous flywheel.
Beautiful. Which one do you feel people struggle with the most?
I think folks really struggle still to this day the most with the engagement. But what we find is that part of the reason they struggle with the engagement is because they're not doing the pre-work, right? Mom and dad aren't on the same page as a cohesive team. Well, then people are like, okay, I'm not going to fully commit to this organization if it looks like there's tension, at the leadership ranks, right? Now that's not the hardest thing to deal with, but if you don't deal with it, it makes everything else harder, if that makes sense. And it's similar with the strategy. I mean, there's a lot of great strategic planning and visioning techniques out there. We've taken the best of those, and we were just doing one for a performing arts center literally yesterday. And they survived COVID. They went through this rigorous time. And they're producing Broadway shows and community arts education programs. They're doing this fabulous community work with really talented people, and they're a super powerful team. But they were kind of trying to boil the ocean, right? Like trying to do everything all at once. So really focusing and prioritizing, by doing that in turn helps people then engage in a more purposeful fashion. So I do think at the end of the day, it is about engaging the talents of your team, or as you like to say, unlocking the talents of your team. But you got to do you got to do some homework, right? You got to do some pre-work to make that all possible.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the plug, Lee. I
You
appreciate
bet,
that.
man. Well, that's what drew me to your show. Like listening to your guests and
Yeah.
your philosophy on it and the way you guys approach it and the different ways people are tackling it. I'm thrilled to be part of this community of guests of yours.
So one of the first guests on my show was Dave Anderson, leadership guru, worked with John Maxwell for a long time. And he dropped this quote, which I thought was so good and relevant to, something you said earlier. But he said, we confuse motion for progress and speed for direction. And I thought that just went really well with what you said earlier about being productive versus being busy. And sometimes we get in that mindset of I'm doing. We just got to move. People just move. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, let's evaluate this a little bit, And I think going back to your ideas of, well, before we do that, let's understand the clarity piece. Let's understand what our team's all about and build that foundation so we know that when we move, it's productive.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to get so much more traction and a better ROI. Of all the calories that are going into it, more of it's going to go to the tires and move that vehicle along.
There you go. Okay, so unleashed. We have leashes. You reference this idea of leashes and locks, these things that hold us back from being better. What are some of those things?
Yeah. It's surprisingly few. I think that's the thing where people think we gotta put more energy in, we gotta step more on the gas, we gotta, force it to happen. And I think there's a degree of truth in that. I mean, everything's in balance, right? Yeah, we gotta put some effort in, no doubt about it. But more often than not, it's about taking our foot off the brake so that it can actually go. And so that's what we mean by those leashes or those impediments or those locks in your parlance. And it's we like to call them sometimes limiting beliefs when we're talking about the cohesion of a leadership team or things that are getting in the way of a team's level of engagement. There's some belief that is usually partially true, but is also limited. And I think the reality is they're always there, but recognizing it, and then realizing the impact that it has on us, and maybe being grateful for how it served us to this point, but not letting it continue to slow us down going forward. I think that's a real surgical area where a leader can, rather than just brute forcing to try to go overcome all these feet on the brakes, taking a few feet off the brakes to allow that effort that is going in to flow a little bit more meaningfully and purposefully. And it's another analogy is kind of like a computer, right? Like the computer's working fine. The code's been written. It's gotten us this far. We've done a lot of magical things with it, but then it glitches and errors and blue screens and crashes. And you're like, what happened? You're like, well, there was some bug or defect in the code there, which until you exercised it, you didn't realize it was there. And I think every leader and every business system has those bugs or those defects. And it's about trying to identify what those are so we can upgrade that software to go to the next level. So that's kind of the
Mm.
philosophy. But you were asking, I think, for some specific examples. So tell me a little bit more about what you were looking for there, Scott.
Yeah. It's just, some things that really hold us back. Like, what are you finding that is just holding people back from being their best selves, from reaching that potential that they know is there? It's inside of them. I don't say you don't need to find your potential. Like, it's already in there. You just need to, what I say is unlock it. You say unleash it. Like, whatever you got to do, undo something to
Yeah.
reach it. So, what are some of those things that you find?
Well, I think actually the one you just mentioned is a pretty common and powerful one. Is there's a belief that it's not in there, right, and that it's not possible, and that's the classic "I'm not good enough." And I work with really talented people who have achieved remarkable success, and they still believe that. They're like, yeah, but it was luck, and there's a degree of humility in it, and I think that's great, but luck is the combination of preparedness and action in a given opportunity. So I think the first belief is you got to believe it is in there. That you are imbued by your creator with something that was powerful and meaningful, and that it wants to come out. But then I think other folks think like, yeah, I know it's in there, but they believe there's the conditions have more to do with their consequences than their choices. I think that's the second biggest one is
Hold
that
on. Say that again. Their conditions,
their
what?
conditions have more to do with their consequences than their choices. So let me give you for an example, right? You know what? It's these darn market conditions, if inflation is happening or, my budget's limited or I've got these duds that I inherited on my team or our systems are outdated or like these are all the conditions, right? These are all the cards that we've been dealt. And they're thinking like, well, hey, when I get the winning cards dealt to me, right? A better economy, better team. When I get those conditions, then my talent will really shine and be revealed to the world as what a great leader or thoughtful person or artist that I am. And I think it's completely reversed. The best poker players are great poker players, not because they always get the best cards, but it's they know how to make choices with the cards they've been dealt. And that includes, yeah, sometimes you fold them, sometimes you hold them. But I think believing that whatever conditions you are in, that while those are factors, those are not the determining factors, that it's your choices that determine more of your consequences. Now, there'll be a delay. You might do the right thing and nothing happens. And then folks believe that, well, that means I did the wrong thing. And I'm like, no, doing the right thing persistently, consistently is what results, right? So there's a delay. So I think also believing that it'll happen right away gets people in trouble because then they quit right before they hit pay dirt. So I think that's a key one is that, look, my choices are going to have more to do with my consequences than my conditions. And so I almost don't care what my conditions are, right? I just, you give me $1 and, tie one hand behind my back. Great. That's just where I'm starting. That's not where I'm finishing.
That is so good. So this whole idea of limiting beliefs is so true. And John Acuff talks a lot about. If y'all know John Acuff,
Yeah. Hmm.
great speaker, and wrote a book called Soundtracks, where he talks about that idea of the soundtrack that we play over and over and over and over again in our mind
Yeah.
is either going to benefit us or not. And a lot of the times we spend a lot of energy with these soundtracks, and we spend a lot of time with ourselves and our brains, and they're talking to us all the time.
Hmm.
And what message are they sending will will really determine the way we show up. And I love that you hit on that. And I love that you put it in context of, hey, one hand tied behind my back, it's just where I am. You know, I got to do what I got to do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. You can
so I
accept that
love
without
that.
being a victim to it, and then move purposefully. And yeah, maybe it just takes you longer. Maybe you got to make a few changes along the way. But I think that's the core belief that unlocks all the other beliefs. And then, if I can share one specific example, I was literally just working with the team on this, and they were like, they were an up and coming change agent, very talented, well trained, and the limiting belief was, basically a version of I'm not good enough, but more specifically was like, hey, I need to know more information before I can help. Right. I need to know everything about everything. I need to be at the same level as the experts. I need more data. Right. And this leads to the phenomenon of analysis paralysis, of course, right? Like we can, it's motion, we're moving, we're collecting data, right? But that rapidly has diminishing returns. And you're like, okay, we're not generating any more velocity from that energy. And so the belief that I got to know more before I can contribute meaningfully. And what happens is, that's a good belief. Yes, you should probably know something. Don't walk in arrogantly and think you know it all. That's a worser belief for sure. But what's underlying that belief is a fear. And I think that's the other thing, is that, like, there's the belief, but when you look for what fear is driving that belief, that's when you find the bug in the code. And in this case, the fear was I might look bad. I might be wrong. I might make a mistake. And there's a lot of systems out there that are beating that into our brains every single day, like you got to be right. And the answer is out there, and the teacher has it, and she's judging whether you got it or not, right? And if you don't, you're going to get less than an A. And I think, in some circumstances, yeah, like, be thoughtful, be purposeful, but a more evolved belief, rather than saying I need to know everything or I need to know a lot more before I can do anything, limiting belief. A more evolved belief would be, right, I need to maybe find out some, but I can leverage my existing knowledge and my expertise to add tremendous value right now. Right. And so now it's like, okay, what's enough to be sufficient to move versus waiting for it to be perfect. And then that allows somebody to show up more powerfully and present and be able to find that the action we can take today that's purposeful, and that will result in speed, like you were talking about.
Yep. Yep. There's so James Clear from Atomic Habits. I keep dropping all these
Oh, dude,
these
yeah, no, I literally just discovered him. We did a
Did
book club
you?
2 months ago. Yeah, I was like, "Where's this guy been?" Like he was like reading back to me. I was like, "Took me 20 years to figure this out. I could just bought this book."
Oh
You know?
my gosh. It's brilliant, right? And it took him a long time to get to where he is, doing what he did. So that goes back to a different quote from Dave Anderson. He said to me, Scott, it's overtime, not overnight. And I
Yeah,
said, oh,
yeah.
okay, that's it. That's it. But James talks about this principle of 40/70, and I'm going to read this to you because I wrote it down. He said, never make a decision with less than 40% of the information and gather no more than 70% of the information available. Less than 40 means you're guessing. More
Hmm.
than 70 means you're overthinking and the decision needs to be made. So I love that principle of 40/70 and thinking, okay, I've I've got enough information.
Hmm.
I just need I need to contribute. I need to add value, and thinking about the consequence of not adding that value and waiting till I have 95 or 98% of the information, and like what's the damage I'm doing not only to my team but to myself, my own personal brand, and who
Yeah.
I am as a leader, or who I like, it does a lot of damage. I think that's critical.
And you're also damaging your customer and your communities, because they're suffering, right? They're dealing with stuff right now that your business or your organization, or your nonprofit or your church or whatever it is, right, could add value. And in the process of you waiting, the clock's still ticking. It's not like the clock's waiting till you start. It's like it's ticking all the time. Yeah, that is a great. I learned that philosophy from General Norman Schwarzkopf, good old Stormin' Norman. I got to meet him in person. The guy is just a powerhouse. And it was that same idea. It's like, look, as a general, you got to have enough to move, but don't wait for all of it, because the battle's already over. So that same principle, right, has just been said so many times, and yet we still believe that waiting doesn't cost us anything, but there's always a trade-off. And it's like, well, I fear the mistake, and that's true that you might make a mistake, but you're also burning calories and causing harm or allowing harm to continue by not acting. So there's a trade-off, right? And it's like, that's why I like that 40-70 ratio. I like how that quantifies it. So you're like, okay, the risk of a mistake's really high and worth a little more investment below 40. But, after that, there's a cost, there's a trade-off to you delaying. And that might be worse than even making a mistake. Because you can make a mistake, figure it out and fix it, and the time it would take you to do more analysis to discover that, right? So
Hmm. Hmm.
learn by failing, right? And then fail faster and get on it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just we call the word wait a four-letter word in our organization. We have some cultural like quirks that we do, and anytime somebody says wait or final, or finalizing, like everybody just goes, oh no, they just start ducking and hiding. They're like, have your head, it's like,
That's
no, we
great.
do not wait. We are purposefully analyzing and thinking and deciding, but we are not waiting.
That's good. I love that. It's a four-letter word. That's really fun. I think about this principle of massive versus passive action. And it's like the passive action of going to the pool, dipping your toe in the pool, dipping your toe in the pool, dipping your toe in the pool, licking your finger, testing the wind,
Yeah,
like it's just you're getting some information, you're gathering some stuff. But by the time you actually jump in the pool, if you ever do jump in the pool, it's time to leave. And
yeah,
then you're like, I didn't even get to swim in the pool because I was so busy testing the water. And it's that idea. And I always bridge that analogy because I think it's we miss out on what could potentially happen or be the benefit for other people, even because it
mm-hmm.
would have benefited other people to be if I was in the pool with them.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like let's jump in the pool, like test the water. I'm all for it. Like I don't even get in the pool until July, until the water's like 90 degrees. So
yeah.
I'm with you, but
Yeah.
like we got to get in the pool at some point.
Don't cliff dive into a bucket, right? Like, look at the
Yeah.
depth. I was a lifeguard. I'm like, yeah, you break your neck. Like that's a lethal mistake. But take a jump in there and like, oh, it was colder than I thought. Like, okay, well, and I think we discount the value of those mistakes. Like, what if it's wrong? Like, just how bad would it actually be? Because
Mhm.
what do we learn the most from, Scott? When we got lucky, we got it right on the first guess. We didn't really know what we were doing. Like, we didn't learn crap from that, right? But taking that dive and saying like, "Oops, wrong pool, too cold, too hot." Well, okay, well now we know, right? And then get out and go to the right pool, or choose a different time to do it, or do a different part of the pool. But make the mistake. It's not going to end you most of the time. And this is coming from an EMT. Yes, there are some mistakes that end you. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the day-to-day business choices to say, be courageous, have that conversation with a teammate that you care about but's not making it happen. Reach out to that customer that you haven't had yet and see if there's a way that you could add value, right? What's the worst they can say is no. I think that's really remembering the value of those mistakes. I think will help a lot of those underlying limiting beliefs.
Smart. How do leaders help unlock their teams better? Like what are leaders like? Yeah, we talked about the leader themselves, like
Mm-hmm.
the things that are holding them back. What can they do to help really benefit their teams?
I think that's really where the value of a leader comes, is again allowing more of the potential to come out of their teams. And I think the way you find it is by listening. You don't find it by talking. And so you have to listen. So you're asking somebody to do something and you're seeing this hesitation. And I think the mistake I know I make all the time, still do, but I'm still learning, is they think that the hesitation comes from a lack of knowledge, or a lack of information, or whatever it is, and then we as a leader try to fill that void. And again, there's a time and a place where that is lacking, and that's appropriate to do. So I'm not saying never do that, but I'm just saying listen and try to discern, is this something where there's a lack of a knowledge, or something like that, or is it a limiting belief that's preventing them from accessing the knowledge they already have? Because if it's a limiting belief to access the knowledge you have, you providing more knowledge isn't going to do squat, right? You're literally wasting your time and their time. And I think that's where the whole art of coaching is about drawing out the wisdom that's already there. And then you can provide the mentorship or the instruction or the support to fill in like, oh, okay, yeah, you literally didn't know that part. Well, let me provide that. So I think listening and asking yourself the question, is this a lack of information or is this a limiting belief? And the clues for me are, when they identify that challenge or that impediment or that concern, right? To ask what's the concern? What's the risk? What's the fear that you see? And I think leaders, because we're trying to be positive, and I'm a super positive guy, no doubt about it, but I think we try to, like, we shun risks and we shun concerns because we don't, those are bad, right? We just want to be positive. And I think as a leader, to really invite the fear and invite the bad and invite the risks and name those suckers, I think that takes a lot of the power that they hold of us out. So like, yeah, I'm not ready to meet with this person yet. I needed to do some more analysis, right? I need to do some more fact finding. And I was like, okay, well, what's the risk you're trying to avoid by meeting with them now? What do you mean? Like, what's the bad thing that would happen? Well, it just may not be very effective. And I'm like, okay, like how? Right. So like go there and they're like, well, then you'll hear it. I'll look bad. It won't be prepared. It'll be wrong. It'll be this, that, and the other. I'm like, okay, that's a legitimate risk. I'm glad you're trying to manage for that. How could you best address that risk if you were to meet with them in the next 20 minutes? Like, what would you do? And then you see that heart rate start, climbing, and you see that stress start climbing. You're like, okay, I am definitely dealing with me a limiting belief right now. This is not knowledge. This is a fear that and it's trying to protect them from getting hurt. But I think that's how leaders, they listen for it and discern, right? Now on the flip side, they're like, no, I totally could. I just don't know where the this is at. And you're like, oh, well, then how would you find out where that is at? And it's like, oh, well, probably just Google it. And you're like, yeah, then go Google it and get on about it, right? Or here it is. That's how we do that. Or here's a video you can watch and get some training on it. Now you know how to do it, right? But that's more often than not the case. It's usually a fear or a belief that's partially right, but is holding them back. I think that's the biggest thing leaders can do. And then, well, let me pause there. We can talk about it further, but I think once you know it's there, then it's a matter of how do you illuminate it so the person can see it and then they can write a new belief. And it will still be limiting. No, it's never perfect, but it will be a more evolved and a better belief. I think that's the gist of it there, Scott.
I love that. That's so smart. That's really smart.
It's just the
To
stuff you and I've read for our
Well,
entire
no, claim
lives.
it, Lee. Just claim
Put,
it, man.
put
Claim
it
it.
into practice, right?
No, claim it. I think that it's also the spin you put on it and how you use your knowledge to enhance or access different people in different ways.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's the gift of a coach. And I was talking about this yesterday to an audience, and I was asking them, you know, how many times a day, how many times a month, how many times a year do you get feedback? And they're
Hmm.
like, oh, I don't know, like maybe in our quarterly reviews, or maybe it's like, a couple times a day, I may get something, maybe. And I said, okay, how many times does a professional athlete get feedback? Like thousands and thousands and thousands of data points. Like they're
They're getting
constantly
videotaped and yeah, right.
constantly getting feedback
Hmm.
on what they're doing. And I think that that's the gift. And I think what you're doing here is you're saying, hey, what you're listening, what you're doing is legit,
Hmm.
right? What your concern is legit. Here's where you can level up. Here's
Yeah.
what we can do to grow. Here's what we can do to progress. So I think that that's really fantastic. So let's talk about so you've got a podcast. Tell us about that a little bit, because I'm interested. You have a lot of good things to offer here. Tell us about the podcast and why you're doing that.
Yeah, yeah. This has been a long time in returning. The irony is I had one back in like 2007, way before any of this stuff was cool. And I'm a man of very, very few regrets. But that's one I should have just stuck with it. I had a really good dear friend of mine who was promoting it and advocating for it. But its time has come. We've done trainings. We've trained tens of thousands of people. We've had many, many clients, and the common request is, how, when you're here, when your team's here, when the training's happening, like this is all amazing, this is great. But we know that education is a lifetime thing, and it's having that steady drip. It's just like you said, it's not like, once a year you go to a training, or, when you have this great consulting team on site, but we want to have access to those perspectives all the time. And so our approach with the podcast is to, work with leaders from wildly different industries and yet distill out what are the common patterns, and that folks that are working in the trenches, front lines, middle level leadership can say, oh, wait a second, well, if they can do that, in that state and that industry, which I would think would be really hard to do, well, then by golly, I should be able to do it in mine, right? So it's really trying to elevate the belief that we can do these things. And then out of each one of them, be able to identify or distill what's one specific or practical takeaway that you can use to address the challenge you're facing, right? So whether it's limiting beliefs or being able to do a better job of talent plans or be able to recruit the right kind of talent, what are those surgical impediments that if we just change things a little bit will open us up a lot, and learning it through reflection, right? Learning it from other leaders who are dealing with that and are going through it right now. So I know I'm not alone. And I think that parallels a lot of the great things you're doing here on your podcast. That's why I think our communities, shares those same underlying beliefs that, we got it in us and we can do better. We just got to get it out to make it happen. So we're super excited about that. We're also going to possibly weave in a couple of episodes from time to time where we just do a deep dive on one subject and really get into the anatomy and the physiology of this particular thing, whether it's a prioritization or strategy or delegation or coaching, and so that way there's a really kind of juicy content, and then there's also really good context that we can compare to.
Okay, cool. What's the name of the show?
The name of the show, really creative. We went out there. We focus group this, Scott. We went nuts. We were calling it the Unleashing Leaders Podcast.
What?
What?
Yes.
I know.
No, I
You know,
get it, man. I get
couldn't,
it. I get it.
couldn't.
Brand consistency. I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's our trademark, that's our brand, and so we're just like, let's start with that. We can always spin off things, but how do we? What does being an unleashed leader mean to you, and how do we get there and get more of our teams to be there too?
Beautiful. Okay. So let me ask you this. What would be, I'm putting you on the spot, the
Yeah.
one concrete takeaway? Let's feed off of your podcast a little bit. And like I'm gonna, since you're on the show, I'm just gonna ask you, what would be the one concrete takeaway from this episode?
Yeah, I think the one concrete takeaway would be recognizing that, our limiting beliefs, have more of an impact over our results than our conditions. And that the practical application of that is when you're in a moment where you feel stuck, to discern, am I stuck truly because of a lack of knowledge or lack of a tool or something like that? Or am I being stuck by a limiting belief that's trying to protect me from a fear or a risk? Right. And if it is that, then to ask yourself to name that fear, name that risk, if I do this, then this bad thing will happen. Therefore, I should delay, get more information, ask somebody else to do it. Whatever that safety valve is, and say like, okay, well, how bad is that risk really? Or is that just a mistake that's wanting to level you up? And then how can I evolve that limiting belief to say, well, no, I have what I need right now. It's not perfect and it will never be, but taking purposeful action today will help me get where I need to get. So that's still an imperfect belief, but it addresses those risks. So I think that's knowing that they're there, knowing how to listen for them, and then choosing to upgrade them. If your listeners can take those three things away, I think there's a lot of families, a lot of businesses, and a lot of communities that'd be a heck of a lot better than where they are right now.
That's gold. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Now I don't have to do it because you just did it. Thank you.
Ah.
So let me ask you this. People want to get in touch with you. Where do they find you? And if people aren't quite ready to like jump on the Lee Skot Unleashing Leaders train full bore, what can they do to get like a little smidgen of love from you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, of course, first of all, we'd love to, if they're looking to take a deeper dive on these things, check us out at the Unleashing Leaders podcast, all the main platforms that are out there. We've got our website, unleashingleaders.com. We just updated that and refreshed that so we can have access to more blogs and learning content. And then on that, you can also get to some of our digital products. We have a really fantastic introductory for first time and mid-career leaders. We call it the Leadership Conversation Series. So we took all the coaching we've done over the years and pulled out what are some of the most challenging conversations that leaders have across the life cycle of an employee, from onboarding to delegating to coaching to giving that feedback that you talked about. And then we packaged them all into these little YouTube type videos, right? Just 10 minutes where you're like, okay, I'm dealing with a veteran employee who this is their first time major mess up. how do I have a coaching session around that? Okay, I'm dealing with this employee and they are chronically, doing the same thing over and over again. How do I have that conversation? So they get the model, they get an example of it for exactly what they need in that conversation. Check that. It's cost of a book, and you get 23 some odd, really targeted how-tos to up your game as a leader. And that what that does, Scott, is it instills that confidence, and it provides some of those scripts and those tools to know what are the right questions to ask, how to ask them to get more out of it.
Okay. Really cool. I love the idea. I love that, it's such a low cost offer that I hope people take you up on it. It's kind of brainless. So I really appreciate you, Lee. I appreciate you being on the show. You've added some good value, and that's what I'm looking for. So thanks.
You bet, Scott. It's great to dance with you. And I think you're working the East Coast. I'm kind of working the Pacific Northwest, West Coast. And, let's just meet in the middle, brother.
Let's do it. Let's change the world.
That's right. Thank you.
Are your beliefs limited? Limiting beliefs, that's the gold. And I love that idea. So we talked about those 4 principles at the beginning of, making sure you have a strong team, you have drive clarity, let's get aligned, and let's really engage the talent of our teams. Those things are really, really essential to what we need to do in an organization to create high-performing teams. But when it comes down to limiting beliefs, how is that really holding us back? And what are we doing to overcome them? Well, first, we got to identify them. We got to understand that they even exist. But I love this idea that a lot of people believe that the situation they're in is just a result of different things that happen to them, as opposed to the choices that they're making. That's called victimhood. That is, I don't have any control. I'm just what I am because of things that have happened, and we just got to deal with it. And it's just like, no, you are here because of the choices you made, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, the choices you make. It's empowering to know that you do have the power to put yourself in certain situations. Now, I love this idea, the fear. Is it the lack of knowledge, or is it a limiting belief? To really know what you need to do to get past it. Because if it's just a limiting belief, if it's a limiting belief, that's something that we can work on. But if it's a lack of knowledge, then there's a gap we need to fill, and let's fill it. Now, that is empowering. It's just about this idea of it. Let's empower ourselves to know how we need to move forward. If we can do that, we will truly unleash/unlock the potential that we all have. So I want to thank you for being here on another episode of Unlocked. If you want to find out more about me, you can go to ScotWaldron.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, do all those things because I love it when you do. And that way we can stay connected and do some things. If you are watching this on YouTube, go over to my podcast channel. Look at podcasts on all the podcast platforms. Go there, listen to the show, follow the show, rate the show, do all those things. I truly appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on another episode of Unlocked.